I'm Thomas from Meaningful Gigs, and welcome to Heroes of the Creative Revolution. In this series, we speak with design and creative leaders about how they produce great work and enable others to do the same. In this episode, we speak with Ethel Jones of RGA about how she advocates for and educates on creative operations internally. Let's dive in.
All right. Welcome, Ethel. How are you today?
Pretty good. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. It's a pleasure. And yeah, would love to learn a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So, Ethel Jones, I have a very English name, but I'm actually from West Africa, born and raised. I'm from Sierra Leone. I've been in the US since like teenage years. And I got into, this ad world just by an accidental internship. I interned as a PR intern at Harper's Bazaar, and I fell in love with the world of like creating and advertising. I was just like, somebody made these ads, and running around just getting coffee and making copies, but in the meantime still being immersed in that culture. And no one in my little African family knew what advertising was. They knew commercials, but they were like, yeah, somebody makes them. But I was hooked from then on. And so I've been in advertising ever since. I'm currently at RGA. And at RGA, I am the VP of talent management. Essentially, it's a role that is in the intersection of managing talent and also the operations of an agency. And a lot of it is creative operations, because creative is the biggest department. Ideally, all agencies should be a creative shop. And so I manage primarily the creatives, but also all the other departments that feed into all the outputs from an advertising agency.
Love that. That's a wonderful background. And so what's funny is when I was growing up in Ghana, I told my dad I wanted to get into design, and he said, no.
That's because it doesn't fall into one of the top three: doctor, lawyer, architect, or is it doctor, lawyer,
engineer?
Professor? Engineer. Oh yes, engineer. It doesn't fall into those.
He's an engineer. And so how was it? I'm just curious about that thing at home. Like when you were going into creative, you said they didn't really understand it. So how was that? How were those conversations?
I think if you still ask my dad, he will say she works in an office. Like, and that's about all that he can correspond. Or sometimes he'll see an ad and he'll be like, oh, did you make that? Like, is that part of it? That's as much as I have gotten him to come close enough to my world. But I think it's one of those where you don't tell your African parents what you're doing until you find yourself either successful in it, or you find yourself having something to share. That's when you say it. But as long as you're like not asking them for money and you're self-sustaining yourself, I think they don't quite know or understand it. But recently, I go to Sierra Leone often. I try to, every time I go, to get into what's the media scene there, what's the creative scene in Sierra Leone, or what's happening. And I see a lot more West Africans just getting into the creative scene and being proud of it, and their parents being proud of it. And so that makes me really excited and happy, because there's ways to monetize creativity. It's not just, you have a wall or mural painting. There's other ways of doing it. So the more I see creative outlets in Sierra Leone, or just within the African communities, the more excited I get. I'm like, more people to manage.
Yeah, I want to go back to kind of your creative ops world and understand or learn a little bit about the misconceptions that come around, and in a title that I feel is kind of different people have different definitions for it. If you say you're a sales leader, people are like, okay, what do you sell? If you say you market, it's like, okay, how are you marketing? And I feel like creative ops, design ops, there's a little bit of mystery surrounding it. So what are some of the common misconceptions that you've heard?
Um, a lot of times people think that you yourself makes the creative. So a lot of people are like, so did you make that? Like, did you? So that's, I think, the biggest one when you say creative out there, like, oh, okay, so you operating in the creative world. Like, did you make that? What's your creativity? What's your niche? What do you do? So that's just one. But people that, have somewhat interacted with any kind of creativity before in the field, especially when being in a career of it, understand that it's something to do with maybe timesheets, or maybe, how many hours people do things, or how people make money. Like that's the background of it. And over the years, unfortunately, there's been some backlash with regards to it, because it's the guardrails that we put around creatives. And some of those guardrails are highlighted in the world where we are laying off creatives, in the world where we are, freelancing more because we only need you a little bit of time and we don't want to make a commitment to you. So in a lot of the world that there's backlash, creative ops feels like the police and the guardrails of that world. In the world where it's successful, creative ops is, oh my God, they gave me the world to do whatever I wanted, and they gave me the opportunity to do what I wanted, and we got paid for it, and I got made a lot of money about it. And what people realize, and it's like the ops behind it made all of that successful.
What do you think is the difference? Because you mentioned sometimes they think you're the police and sometimes they love you. Like, what do you think is the difference between kind of the love and hate relationship?
Several factors, but I think a lot of it is the outcome. A lot of times you don't think about what's happening in the middle of you creating, but what comes out of it, and how does that make you feel when you're done with it. My whole philosophy about creative ops is I want the creatives to notice us the least. I don't want them to know that we are around. If the only time they want us to be around should be if they have an issue they want to solve, but I want to clear the field so much that they don't know that there are these people around that are creating these guardrails for them to go forth and do their creativity. Like, no one told Picasso, you have this amount of time to do this painting, or you only have this amount of paint. You gave him the space to go ahead and do what he does best. And for me, the best creative ops is one that is neither seen or heard until you have a question as a creative yourself.
I love that. I love the reference to Picasso and just letting him run with it and do stuff, but giving him the materials to succeed.
Exactly.
And then, so within these large organizations, like RGA is a huge, company, and with a lot of pedigree and history, and that means when you go into companies like that, you need to communicate the value of creative operations to specific stakeholders, higher ups, whoever, different teams. How have you effectively communicated the importance of creative operations to those stakeholders?
I think a lot of it, we're in the world right now where people are very much counting their pennies, and everybody wants to know exactly how did we make this dollar, or how did we lose this dollar. And so a lot of my role feels like I supplement the data in order for them to understand what went wrong, what went right, in order to replicate it. A lot of our world is trying to really pinpoint what went right and how many times can I replicate that and make it good and keep it going. And so to stakeholders, it's letting them know what are the different parts you have to do that replication. A lot of times I get by letting them know my department helps you understand your intellectual property, the skill sets that you have, the access you have to that skill sets, how fast can they work, how slow can they work. That all of that information my department supplies into you to make better business decisions. Also, when decisions are not going well, the creative ops is what helps you pull different levers in order to keep the engine going, in order to keep the business going. So for instance, a lot of our world right now is going towards the variable workforce, where keeping everybody as a full-time employee is no longer maybe the number one goal. We have too much fluctuations in the business in order to just keep full-time employees going the whole time. So creative ops is what tells you, what do you need? What part of your intellectual property do you need to be full-time? Do you need to be variable workforce? Do you need to be freelance? But I think overall, it's making sure every leader knows, in order for you to pinpoint what you've done right, you need creative ops to help into that. In order for you to pinpoint what you've maybe not done so well, creative ops supplies you that information also.
Makes sense. So it sounds like, yeah, clearly articulating the value prop and then coming with data, right? And understanding what's important to the stakeholders. Can you give me kind of a personal story, an example of when you had to do that and perhaps you overcame a specific challenge?
Yeah, so there's one that I think I'm proud of. So we at RGA, sometimes, again, you mentioned how big we are. And sometimes the bigger the agency, the less it's able to manage juniors. A lot of juniors come in and they feel a little lost in the shuffle, or they're just moved from one thing to another because they themselves haven't found their niche yet. They haven't found what skill set they're great at or what they are. You're just moving them around. But then we realized we were a place that would bring juniors and they would leave. Within a year, they would leave. And it's like, what's the issue? And so for one, my team is noticing this because we deal with tenure and we deal with the availability of talent and who's there to do this work. And we flagged, hey guys, it feels like we cannot be a place to generate and grow juniors to the next level. It feels like their turnover is happening way too quick. And, finance people are always like, that's okay, just bring more in, or that's fine, we can switch it out. But then you have your creative leaders that really want to nurture and they want to create that environment that people can learn in. And they're like, wow, this is a problem. So the first thing was, I was proud that my department was able, and creative ops was able to identify that that's a problem. That's a problem we want to fix. How do we come together to now fix that problem? But creative ops is behind the scenes. So it's how do you feed the right data to the right people to say the right things to create this new environment. And so we created a learning and development program for our juniors that not only acknowledged the fact that they were in RGA, but also to see them. Like when you see an individual and know, here's what you're good at, and here's how I can give you tools to get better into something else. It gives them the opportunity to think like, okay, maybe I do want to stay here, or this place has made a commitment to me, so I can make a commitment right back to them. And creative ops gave the data to the leads. It created the program. It created the platforms for the leads to go out and talk about these programs. And then we did a lot of, conferences for these juniors where they came all together, especially in this remote world where you don't see each other in the office as much anymore. So creating that environment where they came together, we acknowledge their presence, we acknowledge how much we need them, you acknowledge, what their skill set is, and say, more than anything, here's the commitment we're going to make to you. So for me, that was a moment of, you see this machine behind it, gave you information, prevented this attrition from happening, and created a space where people felt like they could make a commitment to each other.
I know with data, there's especially now, there's a lot of data everywhere. What were like maybe the top 1 to 3 data points that you thought really moved the needle, that when you showed these data points that the higher ups or the stakeholders really took note of what you were doing?
So a lot of our stakeholders are very keen to know what affects the bottom line, the dollar. And so utilization is a big it's a big thing that a lot of people look at. To some, it's a taboo word because you're like, oh my God, you're measuring how much I work. To others, it's a word that shows progress because you're showing how valuable this person is to the agency. So I always say utilization is us looking at how valuable our talent is and how much are we utilizing them across great work. Like that's how I would love to put it. But utilization, making them know this staff is the ones that we utilize the most. They can interchange because they haven't essentially chosen their skill set and their niche. They can jump from anything. Their minds are young and open and they want to learn different things. And if we don't have this layer that is willing to jump into anything, you don't have the doers. You only have people that are leads and you don't have the doers there. The other data point is just tenure, making sure we're keeping account of how long are people here. Because your first 6 weeks to 2 months being in an agency, you're not quite doing anything. You're just kind of figuring out like, why am I here? What's happening? How do I log onto my computer? How do I do timesheets? So making sure we actually keep people enough to know the agency, know the process, feel the air in the room to then really tap into their creativity after they've gone through all of this like anxiety phase of just coming in. And then also having people mature, having them keep the client knowledge, the institutional knowledge that they've learned and using that maturity to apply that to different other areas. When we go after new biz pitches, we want people with a lot of tenure and a knowledge. And so when we keep and grow our talent, it shows that. So really utilization, tenure. And then lastly, I was just going to say, knowing that our talent goes to other agencies and knowing where they go. And so a lot of times creative ops are connected in all agencies and we do exit interviews and we see this is where they're going. This is who's nurturing them better. There's nothing like a flame of competition to put like, well, your competitors got that talent and what are you going to do about it? You groomed them and then they just jumped ship and went somewhere else. That could really light a fire under any creatives. But you make sure they get all of this information. Again, creative ops is let's put all the data in front of you to make you make the best business decisions you can possibly make.
Great. I love it. Yeah. And yeah, competition. I was just telling my daughter the other day that competition is good as long as you're using it for good and everybody's getting better in it. Like you want healthy competition. So I love that. So what is what would you say is the biggest creative operations challenge you've faced in your career?
I think everybody calls the Great Resignation, which if we were to put years to it, I think it's between 2020 and even up to 2022, where a lot of us, I'll include myself, reevaluated what we're doing and are you happy in what you're doing? And it was a time that was a reflection on my department also, because if people are not happy in what they're doing, why is it now that they're saying this? Why hasn't this been caught before? What have we failed? What has been not included in their experience in order for them to feel this way? And so I think the Great Resignation was a time for every creative or every ops department in the world to look at themselves and say, what are we not doing? Why are people leaving? Is it right for them to leave? Is it right for us to change a turnover of the talent you have? So for me, that was a period of not only reflection, it was also identifying what are we not doing right? What do we need to change? It was less about the people leaving and more about what is my organization doing and how can we keep the right people here?
What's the most fun you've had doing your job?
Again, I'm not going to date myself, but being in advertising so long that I remember the days of you take a black car home if you worked past 8 p.m. and food was provided if you I think I had dinner at work maybe like months in a row when I was a junior, just because couldn't afford to buy food at home. So you just stayed to work a little bit later and food was provided. But I would say in the role I'm in now, it's creating that culture. I was lucky enough to come in to advertising when it was such a culture. Like, was the culture always great? No, but you knew where you were and you knew what that feeling was. And now I love being part of a department or a leadership that determines, how do we foster culture? Because I always say you don't make culture, you don't create it, you barely flame what's already there, like you barely foster it. So none of us have that ability to create a culture, but I love seeing how new creatives are talking to each other and how can I like augment that. We have a kid who loves DJing on the side, and it's like, you know what, why don't you send a playlist to everyone in the agency once a week or as often as you want, or if you listen to a good song, just send it out to everyone. And he's a junior and he started doing that, and the entire agency talks about the songs that he shares. And for me, that's not creating anything. It was just flaming this kid. He already knew that he wanted to be in music and share this part of his life to all the rest of the agency. And it sparked other people wanting to share, wanting to just carry the conversation of, that song was great, or that song was not great. Give us another one. So I really think the part of my job I enjoy is just flaming any creativity that's already there. Like, how can I give you anything to boost what was already budding within you?
So the young girl that was getting dinners in the office because she couldn't afford dinner, if you were to go back and give advice to her, your younger self, what would be the main piece of advice that you would give yourself just starting out?
Ooh, that's I think I would tell myself two things. One would be not take everything so seriously. And I know a lot of people say that, but I was so like, oh my God, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to not, because I was a project manager before going into creative ops. So it was putting immense pressure on myself, to the point that I couldn't even really speak my own mind or say what, because I had all this pressure on myself to be extremely perfect. And one of the things in the creative world is imperfection is actually creativity also. Like, I truly believe that everything doesn't have to be crystal perfect, bow tied. You can show those, and that opinion is always welcome. And I would tell myself that you give myself the freedom to not be try to be perfect, because I don't think I was perfect, but try to be perfect. And the other is to enjoy the work. Too many times we produce something, we just send it out and the next brief starts. Nobody pauses. I think in my entire career, I went one time to Times Square to see a billboard I had worked on up. Even though there was several I have done, I only did it once. And I don't know that our creatives are currently taking the moment to enjoy and see their work out in the world. And so I would definitely tell myself to go out and see it, be proud of my accomplishments. And I want creatives today to be proud of their accomplishments.
And so, yeah, just have fun and be in the moment, be present, appreciate what you have. The last thing is, as we get to wrap up, there's a specific thing that I've been noticing, being in the creative industry and seeing kind of where the world is going, and I coined this term that we're in a creative crisis right now. And what that means is this. So we have 100 times more channels for creative output than we did, say, even just 20 years ago. Right? There were a lot less places where you could put creative. It's the same magazines or billboards, and now you have 100 social media channels, different TV, cable. Everything has just exponentially grown. So it's 100x more creative work, but at the same time, the number of creative people has reduced or is not as many. So you have exponentially more work, less people. And there are a few things that I think we could do to unlock like a more creative future and ignite kind of a really creative time in our world. But I'm curious to hear like how you think about the creative industry as it's going in the future. Like, where do you think it's going to go in the next, say, 10 years?
Wow, that's a big question. I think you're right. There's so many more outlets out there in the world now. I think when I was building scopes for things before, it was like out of home, digital, and TV, or it's like that was it. And now it's like so many different outlets. You put social and you have to list exactly what channels that social is going to live in. But it actually excites me that this is happening because I think, especially for people that look like me, agencies or any place that houses creatives was somewhat of a gatekeeper because you had to be in these houses or in these, organizations for you to be able to output creative. And I think with the blossoming of all these different channels, you don't need to be in an agency to do that. You don't need to be tied to a particular organization. You can create your own content and people appreciate, enjoy, and pay for that content. There's a monetization part of it that you don't need these gatekeepers no longer to open it up for you in order to do that. What it does though is you have then old school and new school. You have the creatives that came up with, I have this shop on my name, or I have this organization on my resume. And then you have the ones that are like, I have these channels on my resume and here's my followers and here's how I have built myself. And I think we're right now in a time where those two things are competing. The old school agency, like bred creative, is competing with this new age, no boundaries creative, and I'm free to do whatever. And I think the end goal is somewhere that melds those two together, where we still have the education of what constraints are to build within a organization or constraint in peace, and then the ones that come with the freedom. And I hope that wherever I am, I'm creating a group of creatives that is a mixture of that, because you need a little bit of both. You need people to understand, what budget constraints are there, what issues are there, what clients are going to look at. And then you also need that free spirit that's like, I want to do whatever it takes in order to get the likes or to get the viral of this, piece of content.
This is good. That was my last question. Do you have anything you want to plug, any sites or things that you want us to kind of promote for you?
Not really. Like, creatives do whatever. Again, I'm in the background, so nothing to promote, but I do want to thank you guys for this. This was great.